Hey everybody, Tim here with today's review of Doctor Who, story number 7, The Sensorites. This is a great story. Just everything about the story, it worked really, really well. It's 6 episodes and all the episodes are intact. I know a lot of people don't really like the classic Doctor Who, even though I'm watching them. If you guys get a chance, go ahead and give this one a shot. By the end, it is a little bit long, but I feel like the payoff is worth it. It's really interesting all the way through, especially if you guys like the new Doctor Who. There is a little bit of a connection, which I'll get to pretty quick. So the story starts out pretty basic. The crew land on top of something or in something. Barbara's not very specific, and she's like, I don't know, it's just weird. And so they start kind of reminiscing about all of their journeys through the last 7 episodes. They're like, oh, well, I mean, you introduced us to the Daleks and Marco Polo and Marinus and the Aztecs, and we've just changed so much in these the last year or so. And it's just kind of a nice little reminiscing scene, and I like how they go through all of that. When they walk out of the TARDIS, it turns out that Barbara was correct. They landed inside of a spaceship, which this is the first time it's happened. It happens a lot more throughout the series and the franchise, but this is the first. They go through the spaceship and they find 2 people that are dead, and they just kind of magically pop back up to being alive, which that cuts through really quick. It's just to kind of show that things are not the way they seem. And they're talking to the crew, and they're just like, where are you guys from? Because they mention Big Ben and stuff like that. And they're like, you must be from the 20th century, aren't you? And they're like, well, we're from the 28th century. So that just kind of gives you a timeline of how far into the future we've gone at this point. And they just kind of talk about how they're near the sense sphere, and they have encountered the Sensorites. And the Sensorites have the ability to control their brains, and they're not really sure how. Now, the reason I say it has a little bit of a connection to modern day Doctor Who is the Sensorites kind of look a little bit like the Ood. And the showrunners for modern day Doctor Who have said that the sense sphere and the Ood sphere are actually in kind of the same universe, or the same proximity to each other. So it's kind of interesting. We never see the Sensorites again, a little bit of a spoiler, I guess, and it's a little disappointing because I really liked them in this, and I kind of wish that they would have come back, especially now that we've seen the Ood. To have an Ood and a Sensorite crossover, to have both of them, I think that'd be great. So throughout the episode, the Sensorites basically they melt the lock off of the TARDIS, which again, that's something you never see again, but these early episodes of Doctor Who don't have a lot of continuity. It is what it is. And it's basically just kind of the way to lock the crew, the Doctor and Barbara and Susan and Ian, onto the ship. It's the way to lock them into this story, so they can't just be like, well, we're getting in the TARDIS, bye. And so they just melt it and they pull it out. So the first couple of episodes all have to do on this spaceship, and we learn about how the Sensorites have this telepathic ability to control the crew. For whatever reason, it doesn't affect the people we know off the TARDIS. It's just the crew members on the spaceship. And at one point they're controlling them, and they're telling them to crash into the sense sphere, basically killing everybody, and the Doctor and Ian have to jump on the controls and basically stop it. So and then at one point we meet the 3rd member of the crew, and he's basically a zombie, and he's trying to attack Barbara and Susan. It's really weird. And there's this really high-pitched noise. I was watching this episode with my husband while he was in the room next to me, and he's like, what the fuck are you watching? And it was super loud and annoying. And I mean, that was the point of that. And then finally we see the Sensorite crawl up the window, and you look at him, you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. I don't know, the effects, the suit that they're wearing, it's so simple and cheesy looking, but it actually works really, really well. I actually really liked the way the Sensorites looked. So while the Sensorites are going around the spaceship, and they realize that they're telepathic, and so Susan and Barbara start coordinating their thoughts about you will not harm us, you will not harm us. And you can see the Sensorites cowering in fear because it can't hurt them. And then the Doctor kind of analyzes them and realizes they're the opposite of cats because their eyes are fully dilated in the light, but they basically can't see it in the dark. And because they can't see, they get scared. So anyways, the Doctor kind of makes peace, and they go down to the planet. And this is kind of where, like, it really starts to drag. Like, this whole part was super interesting to me, at least. But then once we go down to the planet, it kind of started to drag a little bit, at least for me, because they realize that years ago, a ship, like, kind of exploded near the planet, and ever since then, the Sensorites have been dying quite quickly. Like, the rates have gone up. And it turns out, like, there's this big conspiracy theory, and the Doctor realizes that somebody's poisoned the water hole. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist that. And at one point, Ian gets poisoned by the water, and there's this long montage scene. It's really bad. I'm sorry, but it's probably the worst part about this episode, where the Doctor's going through, like, there's 8 districts, and he's going through each district with a vial of water to try to figure out which one's poisoned. It ends up being, like, district number 7 or something. Of course, it's almost the last one. It's just really bad. And throughout all of this, this whole point, even though it's really, really slow, it's interesting because it's giving us that character development we need for the Sensorites. So they all kind of look the same, which I don't mean to sound kind of racist against the Sensorites, but even they can't really tell themselves apart. And so they have these sashes, like 1 sash, 2 sash, it goes around the neck, or it goes around the sleeves of your arm. And that's how you kind of tell the ranking, like first elder, second elder, city council, stuff like that. And so finally the Doctor goes to the aqueduct to kind of look for what's going on, and he finds deadly nightshade, and that's what's poisoning them. It's not the ship, it's not the survivors of the ship, which they end up finding, but it ends up being a different Sensorite that's been poisoning his own kind. And it's just kind of interesting because then they start, like, switching sashes because they know nobody can tell them apart. And I mean, that's about it. Well, of course, once we get to the end of the episode, everything comes out, everybody's fixed, and the crew leaves. Some little information, like I said, it's 6 episodes. In episodes 4 and 5, the Doctor, Ian, and Susan come down to the planet, but Barbara stays up on the ship. That was basically to give the actress that plays Barbara, like, a holiday, a little vacation to go do whatever. So they just kind of wrote her out. We've seen that before, where William Hartnell went on vacation. And then, so there's been a lot of discussion over the years, even to this day, people debate, is Susan the Doctor's granddaughter, or is she just a companion he got, and she just calls him that, like, out of respect or out of love? I've always been under the impression that Susan is the Doctor's granddaughter. I will always believe that, and to this day, I hope she makes an appearance, especially as the time of this recording, the Doctor's now the woman, because we're on the 13th Doctor. Like, it would be great to, like, have Susan come back with the original actress and be like, you're my grandma, but, like, I'm your grandma. Like, I just think it would have been great. It would have been so perfect. But at one point during this episode, the Sensorites are talking to Susan, and they're like, you Earthlings are so smart. And Susan's like, well, my grandfather and I aren't actually from Earth. We're from a different planet, because Gallifrey hasn't been named yet, at least in the series. And she's like, but we haven't been there in a really long time, but it's so beautiful with the skies of burnt orange and trees of silver. And that's all things that we hear about later on. And then when we finally go to Gallifrey, it's things that we actually see. So I like how they do keep that in the continuity. So overall, I thought this episode was great. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it had great acting. It had its moments of being slow and a little overly dramatic, but for the most part, I loved it. I thought it was really, really good. For those who have seen this one, what did you guys think about the connections between the Sensorite and the Ood? What do you guys think about Susan being the granddaughter to the Doctor? What do you guys just think about this episode in general? Go ahead, let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching my Doctor Who reviews. I will see you guys next time for the Reign of Terror.